My name is Steve Tinney, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Penn Museum, as always. Many thanks to all of you for coming to tonight's installment of the Penn Museum's annual Greats Lectures. This year, of course, our theme is Great Beasts of Legend, and the next and last lecture in our series will be on June 7th, and will feature Adam Smith, Assistant Curator in the Asian section, talking about Tomb Guardians, the story of the Chinese winged lions in the Penn Museum. As usual, after our speaker's presentation, there will be some time for Q&A, and if you'd like to ask a question, just request that you please come to one of the microphones in the aisle. There are actually microphones in both aisles, so that we can all hear it. And so, to tonight's speaker, who will begin us on our trajectory eastwards. Dr. Devon Patel is Associate Professor of South Asian Studies at the University of Pennsylvania and holds a PhD from University of California, Berkeley. Prior to that, he did a BA in Comparative Literature and Asian Languages and Cultures. So he has a very textual basis to his research, but you'll see he uses a lot of iconography. His research fuses the study of texts in various South Asian languages, especially Sanskrit, with the development of the region's literary and visual cultures through time. He has published on South Asian literary cultures and history, on South Asian aesthetics and their relationship to other philosophical traditions, and on the convergence of the literary and the visual in early India. Other research interests include translation studies, comparative literature, philosophy, critical theory, religions of Asia, especially Buddhism, a lot you can see. His most recent book is Text to Tradition, the Ganesha Charita and Literary Community in South Asia. If I read you a little of the blurb for this volume, you will see that just as we emphasize contextualization here in the Penn Museum, Devon's approach seeks to contextualize a specific literary work. This volume, I'm quoting, introduces readers to the poem's author, his reading communities, the modes through which the poem has been read and used, the contexts through which it became canonical, its literary offspring, not sure if that's a Great Beasts tie-in, and the emotional power it still holds for the culture that values it. I suspect that that approach augurs well for this evening's presentation. So please join me in welcoming Professor Devon Patel, who will no doubt give us lots of context to illuminate his intriguing title, Man-Lions, Blood-Seed, Demons, and Wish-Fulfilling Cows. Yep.
Wow. Thank you very much, Steve. That's quite the introduction. So is my microphone on? Everybody can hear? Okay. It's not on. Okay, there it is. I think now it's on. Okay. One of the courses I teach at Penn for undergraduates is on Indian mythology. And even within 15 weeks, some 45 hours in the classroom, we barely scratch the surface on any of the topics that we cover in that course. If I were to do a lecture on beasts fully, in just preparing this presentation, I realized that even this, in 45 minutes, I can barely scratch the surface. The assortment, I use the word assortment here because I didn't know if I should focus on a singular beast, a set of beasts, or just try to give you as much as I can. And I went for the last one. I like big general talks. So the other thing is that, as Steve mentioned, I work with texts mostly. I'm a philologist, not really an archaeologist or an anthropologist or an art historian. And therefore, and in fact, early India, sort of this civilization that I'll be speaking about mostly, which is the quote-unquote Vedic civilization, comes to us mostly through text. There is still, of course, lots of material, but a material culture that hasn't really been able to be discovered yet. It's underneath places where people still live. This is a living tradition also. That's the other kind of thing which is perhaps a little bit different from some of the other cultures that you've seen in the other lectures here, in the other series, or the other lectures in this series. Many of these beasts that I speak of are part of the psychic, religious, social worlds of living peoples still. So that complicates things, but also opens things up. And so I will just go through a series of visuals, tell a lot of stories, and attempt to make a few kind of points that we can bring into a conversation after the fact. And hopefully we'll be able to see what this term means in this particular tradition. So the first slide that I have here is takes us back all the way to the past, the ancient Vedic civilization, which comes after the so-called Indus Valley civilization, where we have lots of material culture to work with, but we can't read their script yet. It's still people are still working on that, and there's not that much we can say about that particular culture. The early Vedic culture has connections with Central Asia and by extension in a much more sort of proto-historic, prehistoric era with other quote-unquote Indo-European cultures. Sanskrit was their language, and therefore, because they are linguistically connected with other cultures, as far west as the old ancient Celtic and Scandinavian cultures, and as far east as the early South Asian cultures, this Vedic civilization, they have connections not only linguistically, but also in terms of their mythology, their social worlds, their religions, etc. So that's the traditions that I'm going to be taking you through today with some of these things. Perhaps no more primeval a myth is there than of the kind of serpent dragon. And you may know about this through Beowulf, Grendel, and various other kinds of beasts of the ancient Indo-Europeans. The serpent dragon Vritra, or in West Asia we have this term Vritragna, which is the sort of the destroyer of Vritra. But this is the great story of the Vedic god Indra, storm divinity, and his great act in the ancient text, the Rig Veda, which is perhaps the earliest of the Indo-European, sort of a literature of an Indo-European culture that we have, full literature. The great act of this great god Indra is to defeat the demon Vritra, the beast. It's often either presented as a cloud demon that hoards the waters, that keeps the rains from falling and easing drought, but also often shown to be kind of like a serpent or a dragon which holds the waters in. And the great defeat of this demon is what establishes Indra as the great king. And so this is just one of the shows, and the serpent, you'll see, this is a Javanese presentation. And the pictures I'm showing you, the sort of cultural world that it spans is not only South Asia, but also in many ways will have connections with West Asia, Central Asia, as well as Southeast Asia, and through various contexts, East Asia. So this is a large world that many of these beasts and many of these beings have a certain kind of relationship with. This is a Javanese representation of the so-called Antabhoga Sarpa, which is the serpent of the end of time. And this is somehow related here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of take you through some of the, I understand that one of the big themes that you've probably been exposed to in this kind of in this kind of seminar series is hybridity. That bestiality is somehow linked with hybrid beings, animals, humans, different kinds of animals put together that you've never seen. Beasts on the verge of humanity and humans on the verge of bestiality, these kind of transformations, all kinds of interesting, powerful motifs and themes. Well, one of the places where we see this, and I'm skipping ahead historically, the ancient Vedic peoples didn't really build temples. These were people whose primary mode of religious and social being was to rely on creating a temporary altar space where they offered sacrifices on the terrestrial realm, which according to them would be carried up through the atmospheric realms up to the heavenly sky realms. And they thought of this tripartite universe as being on some level ordered, pre-ordered. This early tradition didn't think of the world as essentially chaos. It thought of it as essentially ordered, and that it disintegrated into chaos, and the sacrificial ritual would bring the world back into order. And the idea was that each of these three realms were interconnected by certain correspondences, and that through the sacrifice, one actually gained power through recognizing the correspondences. So that civilization created these temporary altar spaces. They had public rituals, they had private rituals, and everything was built around restoring order. And as nomadic peoples, they moved. When things settled, and you have the development of what later becomes what we call Hinduism, which never really loses its sort of Vedic roots on some level, but also new things form. One of them was these giant temple structures. And these structures also reflect a kind of universe of sorts, a universe where all these three realms, the terrestrial, the atmospheric, and the vaults of the sky, are populated with beings of all sorts. And also, of course, the underworld. And even with divinities, with Indra here we have the so-called, the sort of sky divinity, right? The Devas, these are the divinities of the sky. And side by side you had divinities of the earth and under the earth, the so-called chthonic divinities, the asuras. So these are all kinds of beings which populate these worlds. So this is a temple there's so many of these temples in central and southern India and northern India. This is a quite famous one called Khajuraho in central India, instead of Madhya Pradesh. And I just wanted to show you some of the kind of hybrid beasts that you might see on the relief, on the sides of these. Well, before I do that, I'm going to speak of a very famous, and this I put here in the presentation just by way of kind of introducing the fact that when we think of beasts in this tradition, I don't want to, because this is one of the few traditions that we can speak of that hasn't really completely been supplanted by other traditions from the ancient world. These are still living traditions. And Ganesha, of course, as many of you might know, who's ubiquitous in many parts of the world now, is half elephant and half human. You can see the iconography his vehicle. This is actually from the Penn Museum. Both of these pieces are here. The mouse there is his vehicle. All these divinities have vehicles. So the elephant and the mouse and the human. And this is a fascinating story behind Ganesha. I don't know if anybody knows the story, but I'll tell anyway. By way of kind of drawing the transition of some of the values of this kind of Vedic world that get transported into a later period in the history of Indian religiosity. So Ganesha is actually initially born parthenogenetically from his mother's skin, or by various other narratives, as a human boy, without his father's knowledge. And his father, who becomes his father, not biological father, but his father, because the child is born from his wife, never recognizes who this boy is. So the father is the great god Shiva of the later period, and we'll see Shiva again soon. And the mother is the great goddess, the daughter of the mountains, Parvati. And while she is bathing, Ganesha, this human boy, is standing guard to her bathhouse. Parvati, and as soon as Shiva comes, he wants entry into his home, and Ganesha refuses, not knowing that this is his father. And what ensues, of course, is this great Oedipal battle, if you will, between the father and the son who don't know each other. And Shiva finally, it's a powerful being, this Ganesha, he kills the boy and chops his head off. And Parvati, the goddess, comes out and is not happy. She's like, just chop my little boy's head off. Fix this. So Shiva immediately goes off and he finds the first animal that he sees, which is an elephant, chops its head off and installs it on Ganesha's head, restoring him back to life. So what does this being represent and mean? In compensation, one of the great sort of motifs or sort of themes of the Vedic value system is that when you are deprived of a particular asset, you are compensated by the universe with something else. So in compensation for this sort of ghastly result, Shiva grants Ganesha a sort of rulership over his various minions. And Shiva is a god who has his own narrative, which we can't cover in this presentation here, but Shiva is withdrawn from the world, and he lives among the mountains and cremation grounds, and he's the great yogi, constantly meditating and preserving the world through his meditation. And he has these various beasts known as ganas. Ganas are these kind of hordes of troops of various sorts, of goblins and ghouls. And he places Ganesha as these goblins, ghouls leader. Thus his name, Ganesha, Gana Isha, or Ganapati, the lord of these ganas. So that's his compensation. Now, why the elephant head and why the mouse? This is a question which I went around to a lot of people in India asking them. I couldn't really find good explanations in the texts. And the most compelling answer that I got was that, one of the values of that we see constantly being played out in Vedic texts is one of how to, through the ritual or through various other mechanisms, right? The ritual itself is the great mechanism of economic exchange between humans and gods and all the malevolent forces that exist in the universe, how to pacify them, but also how to reap the benevolent forces from the universe. So that ritual is usually just this exchange mechanism that kind of works, but it gets carried over into some of these beings, these beasts, if you will, that same ethos. So here, if we think of the elephant, now the elephant in India is, of course, has a very kind of ambivalent, it's a kind of a hybrid, if you will, significance. On the one hand, they're greatly honored, right? The elephant is something which is very patient and calm and noble, regal. The war elephant, they're beasts of burden of sorts, but they are also can be very destructive. They can destroy, uproot whole villages. Similarly, the mouse, which is the vehicle, is often associated not only with the destruction of wealth, because they can get into the granaries and eat everything up, but their very presence near granaries suggests prosperity, well-being, you see. So you can see that even in this particular image of Ganesha, you have the kind of the harmonization of various forces where benevolent forces and malevolent forces are kind of coexisting, but largely as a kind of principle of harmonizing malevolent forces. So this is a very interesting kind of, this is one amongst many narratives. The one thing that you learn when you study these texts and these worlds is that there are hundreds of explanations. They overdetermine, the culture has a tendency to overdetermine with narratives, things which are mysterious, that produce anxieties, that are difficult to process and assimilate very easily. And as texts proliferate to such a great extent, we have so much to work with. And most of these materials are in Sanskrit, and we can discuss that at some other later point. So that takes me now to these various hybrid beings in these temple complexes. So one of these beings is, unfortunately the formatting didn't quite come out well, but this is the so-called Vyala, or the Vali. Now these are there's hundreds of these, and they're on all of these medieval Indian temples, these Hindu temples. So you see, they have all kinds of hybrid forms. So they have forms of like a parrot's head and a lion's body, or here's some from this book that I got. So there's the lion head with all the various kinds of sort of sculptural forms. You have the cat. This is figure 5. The wolf, right? You have the dog on the left, and the bear here on the right. So many different beings here. The elephant, the Gajavyala. You have scorpions and rams. So it goes on and on. Horses, right? So these various beings are, the serpent, are ubiquitous. And many of them, most of these we have to understand, they're not purely of Indic origin. These represent in many ways a kind of assimilation of things that you may have already heard of from the West, right? So if you think of Central Asian and West Asian, the centaurs, right? The chimera, the sphinxes, ibex, right? All these various beings, they are also, and some of them are very Indic, especially some of the aquatic creatures and some of the other things. So there's people who have been studying these sculptures, and they're kind of, people who are experts in of the Hindu temple and the architectural styles recognize the kind of hybridity even of the beast across the ancient world, and all these beings. Some of these you probably recognize, and these are very specifically Indic. These kinnaris, which are like these kind of human-headed but of various hybrid forms and different bodies. So. See, some of them, even the scholars can't figure out the indeterminable Vyalas, where we don't even know what kind of beast is being presented and shown. The parrot-headed, the vulture. So, and these are a couple pieces from temple doors in Kerala, which are also at the Penn Museum here. And I'm not really sure what function they serve. People have studied these, sort of as gargoyles, things of that sort. But you can see that this kind of hybrid being is sort of in so many contexts will emerge. And the Hindu temple, you can see them whenever you go visit one. Even ones in the United States now. There's one in Robbinsville, that are in Pittsburgh, where you'll see these beings kind of emanating from the walls. These are some pieces from Cambodia and Java. And Kathmandu, this one on the right here is from Kathmandu, the first one on the right-hand side. And these are similar to the Vyala, but these are more aquatic beings known as Makara, which often get translated in modern languages as the crocodile or things of that sort, but they're actually these sea beasts of various sorts, right? Just by the aquatic theme, we also have I couldn't find any kind of visual of this, but sort of the rainbow fish, which is again the different scales of a fish are kind of representative of the different elements: the earth, water, wind, and fire, sort of along with various colors. So these also populate the mythology. All kinds of beasts which have certain kinds of physical and philosophical import. Additionally, and I'm getting these out of the way to get to the real stories that I put in the title that I really want to talk to you about, but I just wanted to give you a range of the kinds of things. Indian astronomy and astrology also have incorporate various kinds of beasts that we see elsewhere. This is a very interesting story of Rahu and Ketu. These are the sort of ascending lunar node and the descending lunar nodes, which are often thought to be responsible for eclipses. And the story of these beings, which are both hybrid, one has the head, is just a head, no body. And one of them is a body, usually of a serpent, and no head. And the narrative, and of course the one with the no head is the descending lunar node, the southern node of the, in the movement, and the ascending or the northern node is the just the head. And the story, and these are also very important, this Rahu and Ketu in astrology in terms of different effects that, these planetary effects on human life, and they're used as to kind of to determine this. And the story behind this is that during this kind of primeval churning of the ocean, this cosmic churning of the ocean, where the divine and demonic beings were kind of churning the ocean with a serpent and this mountain turned upside down to bring forth all these things from the ocean. One of the things that came up, which was very significant, was ambrosia, nectar. And of course the gods immediately wanted to keep that for themselves so as to gain, this is their explanation of how they gained immortality, these sky beings. And one of the demons was named Rahu. And he quickly, what he did was, when the great god, Prajapati or Vishnu in different contexts, was distributing the nectar to all of the different beings, all the different gods, this Rahu, who was a demon, got in line, kept his mouth open, to get the share. As soon as it got to his throat, it was realized that he had snuck in there. So immediately his head was chopped off, right? Vishnu chopped his head off. So his head became immortal, but he had no body, you see. So in revenge, he periodically comes to block out Vishnu's right eye, which is the sun. His left eye is the moon. And this is the explanation for the eclipse, you see. And Ketu, similarly, you can see this. He's usually dragged by 8 horses, and this is one representation of it, just the head. And Ketu is the comet, right? This is the kind of the comet which kind of tails, just the serpent's body, or here a fish's body, and no head. So this is another demon that was also involved with this. I guess this is the other half of him, right? This is the other half that didn't make it. So. We'll come back to this. This is the story of Bhairava, which is the fearful form of Shiva. I also wanted to bring out that all of these, the sort of divine imaginary among Hindus, but also by extension, these are beings which populate even non-Hindu kind of consciousnesses in India. The divine beings are often also hybrid, and this is where I guess this kind of psychic interpretations or approaches can really kind of become very insightful. You have both fearful and extravagantly benevolent forces sort of commingling and living within the same kind of form. And you have, in the narratives, you have emanations, sort of second and third order emanations from certain divinities, which are either their terrible sort of bloody form, or their frightful form, or their extravagantly benevolent form. So Bhairava or Veerabhadra are 2 of these kinds of frightening, fearful forms of the great divinity Shiva, the great sort of static, inwardly looking sort of meditation minded yogi divinity who works. And there's many narratives of Bhairava which again, you see the kind of right on the verge of being bestial, right? This kind of, I think that kind of edge, the edge around which we kind of draw the line between human and beast, gets played out very interestingly, not only when it comes to thinking about the divine, but also, as we'll see, when we think about the human, to how close they get to being beasts. And there's a long-standing kind of conversation about this in the tradition, about transformations. How does one become liberated from their bestiality? How does one become enslaved by their bestial natures, right? These are all the different kinds of narratives which kind of get played out, and you can see the visual and the iconography of the narratives. So, now I'm going to tell some stories before we kind of just kind of draw it all together. And these are very famous narratives. The first one I wanted to talk to you about is that the beast is often an instigator for some kind of divine action, divine benevolence. So the origin of the great goddess, for those of you not familiar, when we think about Hinduism and its actual ritual practice and its contemporary lived worlds, the three major divinities or the divine imaginaries around which human beings gravitate are there two forms of male divinities. One is Shiva, who, as I've already explained, represents this kind of inward, almost non-active male force. And then you have Vishnu, who is the kind of social, God visualized as king, not God as ascetic, as in Shiva's case. And both of them have their own very interesting manifestations in the world. The female goddess, the female is the third of the great lived traditions. The creator divinity Brahma doesn't really have a place. There's only one temple in India left to him, in a place called Pushkar. And it makes sense, once he's created the world, there's really no more use for him. He doesn't really take part much in the world anymore, you see. But these other three are heavily involved in the liberation and in the well-being of human beings. So the story of the goddess was that there was this terrible demon, this buffalo demon, and you see it right on the bottom here. And demons periodically emerge, these beasts, the sort of, and many of these demons are actually humans who have attained great power and then manifest as beasts. So this is one of the kind of ways in which you have this kind of hybrid human-animal beast which comes out. And this buffalo demon was so powerful that none of the male divinities could defeat him. So the logic was that they infused all of their power into the female. And so the goddess that emerged was actually the amalgamation of all the powers of the universe, both male and female. And so she now engages, and the various forms of her, Durga, Amba, engages with the destruction of this buffalo demon. Now this buffalo demon is, very interestingly also, has a kind of a tension, because he, of course, doesn't take her seriously, right? And in fact, he comes on to her, right? He sort of attempts to, sexually dominate her and patronize her. And there's a big battle, and she defeats this demon and reestablishes order in the universe. But you can see that even in all the iconography of this particular goddess, the great goddess Durga, you never really see, you always see a placid face. She's always visualized as still beautiful, even though fierce. She has all the weapons, all her arms represent all the different weapons of the gods that she carries, or the male gods that she carries in addition to her own. And this is sort of the standard first order emanation of female power and strength and defeating the demons. The story that I had in the title, right, the blood seed demon. This story is this beast which again instigates another emanation of divinity. In this case, the beast is particularly nasty. Every time that Durga, the goddess who defeated the buffalo demon, kills this particular beast, whose name is Rakta Bija, which means blood seed. Every time she kills him, his droplets of blood spawn new Rakta Bijas. And this really makes her angry, because she's getting frustrated. She can't kill enough of these. And her forehead turns black with rage. And from this forehead emerges a ghastly, violent form of her. And this is the goddess Kali, the great black goddess. And this is, of course, the great nightmarish figure for the normative kind of sort of social world of the kind of bloody mother, right? She's has garlands of skulls, and she has a jagged saw as her weapon, and it's very ghastly. And she's sort of painted as a hag, as you'll see in these pictures, right? These are from the Penn Museum right here of Kali. And what she does is she has this big rolling tongue. And that tongue is what then swallows up all of these droplets of blood. So her protection comes from her radically and absolute ghoulish powers. And periodically, the beasts which emerge from the imagination are often linked again with this kind of the universe's power gone wrong somehow. That creates disturbances in the universe, which then have to be remedied by new forms of, if you will, divine beasts that have to be formed to counteract them and restore that kind of order, which we've seen in the Vedic forms. And this has become quite a popular one. Here's a horrible image, which was horrific, which is a kind of a more contemporary poster art kind of thing. And I recently learned, I thought it was my idea, but it apparently wasn't, that this would be a great video game to have this blood demon, this seed demon, but it seems like it's already done. And here, that demon is made female, right? This is Rakta Bija in some game or some series which I found on the internet, which is very interesting. So a fierce but a more benevolent form of this kind of same idea of this beast emerging as a counterforce against some demonic entry into the world, is this man lion, very important avatar of Vishnu, right? Vishnu is the one divinity that actually manifests in different forms on the earth throughout the periodic dissolution and creation of the world ages. So in every age there's a new demon, and in every age Vishnu has to come down to deal with that demonic energy, a demonic force. This one is a particularly interesting one. This is a story where this particular demon, whose name translates something like golden eye or something, Hiranyakashipu, who meditates and acquires through his ascetic powers. Ascetic powers give you power in the universe, whether you're a good person or a bad person. This is how this world thinks of things. So this particular king acquires these great powers, and he's given a wish as compensation for his asceticism. And his wish is that, I wish not to be killed by a god, a human, an animal, a Gandharva, these divine musicians, the Siddhas, these divine scholars. He goes through the whole inventory of beings. So I don't want to be killed by any of them, because you can't ask for immortality. That's the one thing you can't ask for. They can't give you that. So he's trying, like a good lawyer, just to go through all the stipulations to get everything right. So now Vishnu has to come as something else. And this is a great story where the son of this demon is kind of a bad kid because he worships Vishnu. He worships his father's enemy. And he tries to kill him every time. And he keeps getting saved by Vishnu. And finally, he's on the other conditions that he asked for was, I don't want to be killed during the day or during the night. I don't want to be killed inside or outside of my house. Right? He tried to cover all of his bets. And he's trying to kill this kid. You can't kill him. And he says to him, they're outside, he's like, so where's your Vishnu? I can't see him. Is he in this little pillar? And he kicks this pillar, and out emerges this man lion, Narasimha. And this is very interesting. Even in the Sanskrit language, you see the hybridity and the sort of a new emanation. This is a special kind of exocentric compound known as the Bahuvrihi, where you have man, Nara, Simha, lion. But it's not a lion who is a man. It is not Nara, it is not man. It's man lion in its form, but it actually refers to something outside of the members of the compound. So it's the one, that is to say Vishnu, who takes the form of a man lion. So you see that even this kind of hybridity often speaks to something new, a new creation, which is more than the sum of its elements. And sometimes you see long names, right? So there's a very kind of you can proliferate and create all kinds of interesting beings through the language itself and how it's visualized. So this Narasimha pops out of this pillar, and he tears open this demon's innards, his claws. And how did he do it? Well, he's neither human nor God, so he covered that bet. He kills him on the porch, on the portico, right in that space that is not inside or outside of the house. He does it at dusk, at that very moment when it is not day nor night. Right? So all these conditions are met, and he's killed. And these are two images which are of Narasimha, which are at I believe these are also at our museum. Or they might be at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but okay. So associated with this story of Narasimha, another thing that the production of beasts emanates from is a kind of a sectarian rivalry. Whenever you have divinities and divine imaginaries, which are complex and which kind of speak to people, you also have rivalries, and that gets very much represented in the literature and the texts. So you'll have, devotees who will fight who's more powerful, Vishnu or Shiva, or the goddess, right? Sometimes it'll be kind of composite, harmonious, where all of the divinities, all of the ways of imagining divinity gets harmonized, and you'll see that. And sometimes there are kind of sectarian rivalries. So with this Narasimha, this man-lion emanation, each of these avatars has to also find an end. So Vishnu traditionally has 10 avatars, right? He comes as a fish, a tortoise, a boar, a man-lion, a little person, Vamana, as a violent human who murders, who's given over to anger. And then the two great ones, Rama and Krishna, who we may have heard of, the great sort of human emblems of different, they all have their own different qualities. And then even the Buddha, as he's been assimilated into, as Buddhism has been assimilated into Hindu thought. And finally, the 10th, which is yet to come, the kind of millennialist, the Vishnu of the next age will come to defeat the next brand of demon that emerges in the universe. But you see that each of these avatars cannot coexist except for one, which is the immortal avatar of that angry human, Parashurama. But many of them, they disappear after an age is over. And this story is very interesting because you have a kind of conglomeration of the end. How is a Narasimha avatar going to be completed? Well, what happens is you see the sectarian stuff kind of comes together. So Shiva comes as this particular beast, if you will, which is this, it's called the Sharabha, which has often the head of a bird, the body of a lion, sometimes 8 legs. It's represented very differently in different contexts. And he now battles the two-headed bird, which is another second-order emanation of Narasimha. And this two-headed bird and the Sharabha, they battle, right? There's the Sharabha, the lion's body and the head of a bird. And here he has wings. That two-headed bird is called Gandaberunda, and it's still very important in the southern state of Karnataka. This is their state emblem, this battle between Sharabha and Gandaberunda. Now, Gandaberunda is Vishnu, and Sharabha is Shiva. And they battle, and there's different narratives about how they basically destroy each other, and that kind of ends that particular avatar, right? So there's always kind of narratives that are overdetermined, how beasts fight beasts in order to kind of, have the flow continue, have the worldly flow. So this is a representation of that Gandaberunda as well. Here's another Gandaberunda and Sharabha. Okay, so the final bit I'll be speaking about are sort of this middle part that I've talked about has come from these so-called texts known as the Purana. This is the ancient lore of the Hindus, which basically tells stories of Vishnu, Shiva, the goddess, pilgrimage networks, the sacred geography. It's sort of the great lore that in some ways was probably composed and lived side by side with the development of the ancient Vedic tradition, the sacrificial traditions that I started with, but represents a distinct transition moment. Then there's another set of texts which are very important and produce some beautifully important beast representations, and those are the great Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Both of them are extremely long. The Mahabharata, in fact, has the claim of being the oldest or the longest poem in the world. It comes in at 200,000 lines of Sanskrit verse. To give you an idea, it's basically the size of the Iliad and the Odyssey put together times 8. That's how big it is. It sees itself as encyclopedic, and it basically tells the story of the world's first dysfunctional family. This sort of two sets of cousins that kill each other, and everybody dies at the end. But that's the great epic. But I won't speak of that epic, because that epic is full of complex humans, also a lot of beasts. In fact, the first book of that epic, out of its 18 books, actually has a narrative of the origin of species. And the origin of species is actually hybrid. Animals and humans come from similar lineages. These serpents and humans are born from similar kind of human and serpent ancestors. Very interesting narratives, but these are all complex. But the two characters that I will focus on come from the second epic, the Ramayana. The Ramayana is one of the that may be the most important text from the point of view of being an acculturating text and a text that's known of all of ancient Asia. The stories extend all the way from Central Asia all the way to East Asia, including South and Southeast Asia. And the Ramayana, of course, focuses on the great avatar of Vishnu known as Rama, whereas the Mahabharata has Krishna in it. So this is where the Bhagavad Gita and everything comes in that Mahabharata text, which many of you might know. But the Ramayana has two very important figures, and the Ramayana in some ways has a kind of a fairy tale motif. So you have a human realm, and then you have a kind of beast realm of monkeys, and then you have this kind of demonic realm. And the demonic realm is full of these human beasts almost. They're human and bestial, but they're congenitally evil. There's something about them that they don't have that, even though they're complex in many ways, they're understood in the kind of structure of this narrative that they are evil. Humans represent a kind of normative way of being in the world. And the monkey kingdom, interestingly, is a kind of in-between space. So this is the way the epic explores social, political, moral being in terms of, in many animal tales, the famous fables, Panchatantra, Hitopadesha, Aesop, Grimm, often use animal characters to represent human society. But
Hanuman is the great monkey divinity, who's also, of course, very important. He's a great friend and devotee of Rama, Vishnu on earth, and many devotional cultures are built around him. Might be the most popular divinity in all of India. There's more temples and more sculptures of Hanuman than almost anybody else. So it's very important. I can't go into them, we're running out of time, I see, but just wanted to kind of shows you. This is the last figure I wanted to, or among the last I wanted to show you, and this is the great 10-headed demon, Ravana, who was the enemy of Rama. And this is very interesting, because this you get that sense of the human verging onto the bestial. Ravana is initially the son of a human seer, sage, very learned. And he performs ascetic practices, and he's understood to have 10 heads. One of his name is the 10-headed one, the Dashanana. And this is from our Penn Museum also. And he, in his last gasp to gain immortality again, or to do what that man-lion, the man-lion's enemy had done, he starts severing each one of his heads in offering, and Shiva finally offers him, "Okay, what do you want?" And he mentions all the creatures he doesn't want to be killed by. He doesn't mention humans, because humans are like tasty snacks for him, right? He doesn't care about the humans. And of course, this is the impetus of Rama coming to kill him. But you see this being, these 10 heads, you see. And this is a kind of a sci-fi contemporary representation of this Ravana. This is, every year they have Ram Leelas, where they enact the story of Rama. So this I want to convey, these are living traditions, where the kind of demonic being is represented age after age after age in different forms. And in fact, every year when they kind of burn the effigy of this demonic being, they kind of often, in different contexts, they might place who they might think of as a real demon, like a demon of that age in a particular context. And so, look at this on the left. This was some years back, right? Osama bin Laden was presented as somehow a demonic being. I mean, this is not necessarily something which is not much thought is put into it, but they basically take topical things happening in the world, and sort of the bestial demon is inserted into whatever's happening in the world. This is a child's rendering, which I found also very interesting. So in ending, I just also wanted to kind of bring back the idea that many of these beasts share, of course, very close connections with beasts that we find in other parts, and maybe you've already heard if you've been attending earlier lectures. Different. I mentioned already the Vyalas, those temple beings, which are, definitely have links with, West Asia, earlier Iranian, Persian, and even further west, perhaps. Also, you have things like the mermaid. This is a particular story from the Cambodian traditions of Hanuman, the monkey divinity, and the mermaid. There's a kind of a seductive relationship, and this is a particular. So this is something that you see. And the final thing I'll end with is, since I put it in the title, is the famous Kamadhenu. This is the great wish-fulfilling cow, who was also. This image is from the Batu Caves in Malaysia. And but this is a being where also when the ocean was churned and the nectar came out, which led to the comet and the ascending and descending lunar nodes, also from that ocean everything came, right? So the great horse and the elephant, Lakshmi, who became the wife of Vishnu, came. The sun, the moon, which became Vishnu and which became Vishnu's eyes, and even the toxic poison, the sort of halahala, which Shiva drank in his compassion and arrested in his throat. And this is why you often see images of Shiva. But also what came was this wish-fulfilling cow, which everybody wanted. And there's been so many wars fought over this wish-fulfilling cow in the mythology. If you read these narratives, everybody wants to abduct this cow from whoever has it, because it can produce anything. And you can see again the sort of benevolent beast, Right? The kind of range is incredible. We often think of beasts as monsters and that sort of thing, and I kind of do an exercise with my students, and I try to think about the beast and what we think about with the beast, and we think about violence or monstrosity, hybridity, different forms that form in a beast, but also, we can add a certain kind of benevolence that's also possible, as we've seen in these kinds of hybrid beings and various forms of humanity and bestiality kind of converging. And we learn a lot about, through the beast, about, how does one become free from their bestiality? And this is something which also you see represented in these narratives, is often these demons in the Ramayana, for example, or even certain beasts who have certain forms which they've acquired through various, in various ways. When they are killed, they actually are liberated of their bestiality if they are killed by God or by some form of God, and they enter into, and they or their form is restored. So there's a lot of interesting narratives about not only how you become a beast, but how you get liberated from being a beast. And this is very interesting that the narratives and the visualization and the iconography kind of expand and explore this particular kind of psychic aspect of what does it mean to be a beast. And that's something which I think is very fascinating about a lot of these things. And it sort of helps us peel the layers below the surface of just the kind of monstrous visual, each one of them has a narrative, and they all have a certain kind of, their trigger points to, semiotically as signs, as symbols of delving into deeper kind of psychic, social, ethical, moral realities, which cultures are attempting to struggle with, and deal with. So I think I've gone 50 minutes, and so I'll end here, and I can stay as long as they keep the lights open and take questions. So, please, yes.
Great talk. Many different questions I could ask just to make it blossom, just to feed it more, But just for fun, you talked about the beast and the human being and the many, many lessons in the text and in the art that represent ways to liberate yourself from the beast and then also warn against
Becoming one.
becoming a beast. But just for fun, I know from seeing in certain temples there seems to be a third way where, and I'm not talking about the left-hand path, but let me just drop that because it relates to what I'm going to say.
Sure.
There's ways of getting into the beast and giving beauty to the beast, because you see these gorgeous pictures of men and women in arousal, in the acts of lovemaking, and it's something that's completely alien to me as where I was raised.
Sure. Well, that's a very interesting point you make, and there's two things actually. One thing, one of the narratives from the Mahabharata, which I didn't mention here, was that also some of these sages, one of the things about being a beast is that, it's often associated with a kind of demonic aspect or a monstrous aspect of beasthood, is that it can shapeshift. A lot of these demons can transform themselves into, beautiful things, all kinds of visual, a surface things, but it doesn't eliminate their essential, bestiality. And also, sages, seers, powerful beings who've acquired great spiritual powers can also transform themselves. And you have various narratives of sages turning into deer and making love, in kind of the forest. And So that's one point, that this idea of, that is a very good point you make about the kind of the fluid movement between the two. But the other point you make is also very interesting, that there are, of course, ritual and religious cultures within these larger traditions that are attempt to create a third path, as you say, you know? Now, the left-handed path, you can speak of these kinds of traditions which are kind of attempting to, through superficially going, exploring counter-normative behaviors, but in search of a kind of deeper reality and significance. Even outside of that, the iconography, the visualizations, and the kind of broader logic of that is also that just as you know, you can harmonize malevolent and benevolent forces in a singular beast, like with Ganesha, right? That in fact, that's really a third kind of path, is to not think of beasts as either malevolent or benevolent, but as kind of harmonizations of the two.
Yeah, I think when you show various pictures of people, gods, or figures on the edge of between human and beast, I think what aesthetically, nothing means anything to me without tension. And so these pictures are beautiful because they carry that tension. So it's one thing to have harmony, and it's another thing to have harmony with a really dramatic tension, with a little bit of risk.
Yes.
You know, deep inside the harmony.
Yes.
Yeah, they're just beautiful.
Yes. And it has to shock and awe a little bit, you know, in that way, yes. Yes.
My idea of the Kamadhenu is that it's a kind of equal opportunity, benevolent, beneficent creature. Is that correct?
Yes,
Non-sectarian.
because equal opportunity, and in fact, villains confiscate it, and you know, normatively virtuous people get it back. Sages, kings, everybody wants it. So it's true. It's sort of the thing in the universe which is just benevolent and just giving.
But from a sectarian point of view also as well, right?
In what way?
Well, I thought I spotted Shiva Linga underneath the udder of the Kamadhenu.
Oh, well, I think that image I gave you perhaps was not the Kamadhenu itself. A Shiva is associated with the great bull. Maybe I didn't give, and sometimes they also conflate the two, so you're right. Shiva is associated with, his vehicle is the bull. Vishnu's is the great vulture, Garuda. But yes, so there is a linkage between sort of the bovine and Shiva, that's true. Kamadhenu as the wish-fulfilling cow, which appears ubiquitously in the literature, however, often you know, we don't see it as actually belong. It's a product of the ocean, out of which creation came, and therefore is not really the provenance of Vishnu or Shiva. But you're right that the bull and is often associated with Shiva.
So is that a Shiva Linga underneath?
That is a Shiva Linga.
Okay.
That is, and that's very interesting. That this is from the cave. It's a cave from the Batu caves, and I haven't been there myself, but I found this image from there. Yes.
In the illustration of Durga slaying the buffalo that you showed us,
Yes.
there is a little boy. Who is he?
This one, right?
Yes.
You know, I don't know. All of these narratives have, you know, as they've been, they accrete, they grow. You have a very basic narrative, but in different traditions, like that Narasimha, when I showed you with the two-headed bird and eight-legged sort of, you know, bird lion. Those are narratives which kind of emerge and are often very local. They're not, and so I'm not clear what function. This may be yeah, I can't. And there's also a dog you see on the right here that's sort of
Yeah,
biting.
there's-
So I'm not clear. I'm not clear who these beings. Huh? A lion, right? That's a good question. I'll have to find out. Do you have a theory?
No, I thought it was more like a white wolf.
Oh, the animal.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
animal, but the boy,
Yeah.
I don't know, unless it's her offspring.
Well, this goddess has no offspring.
So then, I don't know.
Yeah.
And as far as the double-headed bird,
Yes.
and it reminded me so much of the Habsburg eagle, with the two-headed eagle. I'll leave it there.
Wow.
So,
Okay. Afterwards. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can go up there if you'd like, or you can speak here, and I can repeat your question. Okay. Yes.
so along the same lines on the previous slide with the sea dragon, there's a very cool flying elephant. What can you tell us about flying elephants?
Here. Indra's, out of that churning of the ocean, one of the products is Airavata. This is the divine elephant. And Indra takes him. Also, the divine horse comes up, Uchayshravas. He takes him too. Everybody takes all the good stuff. Only the poison is left to Shiva, because nobody wants it. So he swallows it out of his compassion and he arrests it. And the universe lives in his belly, so he keeps it here because of his yogic powers to arrest the movement of fluids. And that's, but the flying elephant belongs to Indra. And in fact, Indra, speaking of flying elephants, is even insentient beings are bestial in this tradition. So for example, you have the mountains. The mountains used to have wings. The mountains used to fly. And Indra, in an act of compassion in the Veda, cut the wings off. And that's why they're fixed. But because they were crashing into everything. So it's interesting. This kind of flying beings are, but the elephant, yeah, this is a flying elephant. That's true. I forgot that he flies.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Can I ask about, you mentioned that there's of course, there's Shiva and Vishnu, and then there was a creator god. Is that's Brahma?
That's Brahma or Prajapati. But Brahma, of course, the question was the three divinities that I mentioned. I mentioned Vishnu, Shiva, and I mentioned the goddess, Durga, Amba. But, oftentimes in this kind of creation of some kind of trinity of some sort, Brahma, the great creator divinity, is mentioned. And while that's true, in the lore, the creator divinity does have a place. There's a lot of narratives about Brahma. But in the kind of devotional cultures that develop out of this, Brahma loses, there's no particular connection because he's not involved with grace. He's sort of the watchmaker divinity who sets the world in motion, but then has no further role in it. So he's often...
Now, there's one more thing, too. I noticed there was a figure where the two-headed bird was. There's three figures. And it's a symbol of India because it's on their postage stamps. But who is that?
So the question is the figure of the
Yes.
three-headed lion. This is very interesting. About this is something which I can't speak to with as much expertise as one of my colleagues here at Penn, Professor Michael Meister, who wrote about who's one of the great experts on the Hindu temple and the architecture. He's an architectural historian. But the three-headed lion and this kind of pillar, you often see this on the pillars of Ashoka, and who was one of the great kings. And this probably has linkages with ancient Persia, Persepolis, right, the lion motif. This is something which many people have connected up with the kind of shared visual worlds of ancient peoples. But certainly the three-headed lion seems to be that kind of connection.
But it seems to have a national significance.
Yes, because the Ashokan Pillars, see, these are the oldest forms of writing we have in that are extant are these series of these rock faces, pillars, inscriptions all over the country, and they were attributed to King Ashoka, who basically sort of India's first ancient empire, and he also was somehow consolidating different sectarian communities, regional communities. So there's a certain kind of special place for him and his kind of. So that's why you often see that integrated into the iconography of modern India. Yes. Yes.
I feel as though my brain just doesn't work this way, and I'm just wondering, I mean, I guess I have a very Western world brain, that I don't have this imagination, and I'm wondering, the ancient world just seems to have had a closer association either with their dream world or with alternative states that I'm just too far away from. I mean, I'm fascinated by it, but it just feels to me, I mean, I love this series because it's introducing me to mind-blowing stuff that I feel like I've been on a high listening to all of these imaginary things, but I don't have that, and I'm just wondering what that is. I mean, I wonder if the brains were different.
You know, years ago I was in a course with Professor Carl Kroeber at Columbia on Native American literatures, and we were discussing this, the kind of rich imagination of ancient peoples in terms of representing their psychic and their realities, their anxieties, their wants, social world, the physical world, their history through this kind of mythic imagination, if you will. And one of the things that he responded to in this question, this problem was that we have that we don't think mythically anymore in that way. It's a very interesting thing, and in some ways, I think complex and subtle thoughts sometimes require you to tap into sort of sort of a deeper layer of imagination, because certain things we can't really express through our kind of given language, and we need to create new beings to express whatever is going on, and that's a very interesting point you make. I'm sure everybody here has something to offer on that if they've thought about that question, because there is something remarkable about this. And these stories, even when I tell them, every time I tell them in their depth, and I give more details, of course, when I have more time, and we have the conversations, they reveal so much, the symbolism and the signs and the potential increases. And it leads to far more subtle thoughts, far more subtle understandings of the world, a kind of therapy also, to figure out what's sort of traumatically happening. I mean, people do this with dreams as well, I guess. They interpret dreams which have their own kind of structure, but yeah, these narratives, what's remarkable about this particular tradition is that these are still alive, on some level, meaning that they still are known, they're represented, they're kind of in common language, they're kind of bandied about, they kind of think through them still a little bit. Of course, with every passing generation, it's becoming more and more diminished, and even in many areas. But you still have, these are still kind of trigger points and ways of entering deeper into some problem or conversation, which is an interesting point. Yes.
They've taken away the microphones.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I can repeat whatever but I think everybody can hear you.
I don't know if you the last question.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Don't you think that literacy has erased a lot of this, and that, our antecedents had a great deal of this kind of information and imagination that's disappeared?
Perhaps. Many of these things are both. Of course, literacy, and this is a new kind of trend in thinking about what literacy might mean in the ancient world or even in the medieval world in different cultures, is what they call orature, right? Oral literature. The oral is as much literate, or what we associate with literacy. So there is something about storytelling, and I agree with you that that maybe there's something about the oral and the oral, like listening and hearing, which kind of allows for stories to not only emerge but also to change, because with every telling you have new versions, sort of like a folklore of sorts, And perhaps this is all linked in that world, and maybe when it gets textualized, it becomes more kind of standard, and actually the richness maybe diminishes. That's the way I might want to think about that in terms of the less and less we share stories, that they become maybe less interesting. That's a dark note to end on, but oh well.